Passing dreams, waking nightmare. The wreck of the Irex. 1890. Madness and heroism at Scratchel's Bay, Isle of Wight. At her launch the well-wishers gathered. As with all such ceremonies past, there were many dreams of serene voyages. Like ships that pass in the night, those dreams were soon to slip away. Serenity was doomed. At 2,347 tons, the brand new Irex was intended to be a great sailing ship, plying her trade across the oceans of the world. Instead, she would become known for the disaster of her maiden voyage and become the biggest ship to be totally wrecked on the coast of the Isle of Wight. On December the 10th, 1890, the Irex was towed from the Clyde to the Irish Sea to commence her first voyage. She was to take a cargo of iron and clay pipes to Rio de Janeiro for new gaswork. Under the command of Captain Hutton, the shining vessel had barely set sail when she was hit by a southwesterly gale, which caused her cargo to shift, and she was put about back to Greenock. Having had the pipes restowed, Irex sailed on Christmas Eve, but again gales forced her to shelter in the haven of Belfast Lough. Here she rested until New Year's Day, 1890. All seemed well at first, but very soon the bad weather returned with a vengeance. Southwesterlies brought squalls of lashing rain and heavy seas which swept the decks. On the 5th of January, 6 men were nearly lost overboard, 2 of them sustaining serious injuries. By the 16th of January, the storm had become a veritable hurricane, and frightened crewmen beseeched the first mate Irvine to take command and run for shelter. "I'll sink her first," was the angry reply. By the 23rd, the crew were at their wits' end, and a deputation went to see Captain Hutton. This man, who had not seen his bed since leaving port, simply replied that he had no idea of the ship's position and therefore couldn't set a suitable course. However, their whereabouts were soon verified by a passing steamship as the Bay of Biscay. Captain Hutton decided he'd had enough and made for the English Channel and the port of Falmouth. For 12 hours the Irex drifted hove to, awaiting a pilot. Occasional glimpses of land appeared through the stinging hail, but no seaman could be expected to set out in such weather. Eventually storm sails were again set, with the destination of Portland in mind, but only a hazy idea of the vessel's speed could be determined. They were running before the gale, with tricky tide and currents. For well over 14 hours the helmsman fought against deadly broach, and the Irex ploughed on through the black winter night. The captain's icicle-stabbed eyes peered ahead at the phantoms, which cavorted in the streaming spume. He knew that soon there must be a light, a pilot to lead him. With no sleep, wet, cold, and raw fear as his companions, his command became the burden of hell. Again and again his bridge shook as waves of granite slammed the ship. There it was, ahead, to port. A jewel winked, or was it phosphorescence? There again. Hallelujah, the pilot's come to take us home. The lookout also saw the faint flash, but he knew what it meant. It was the distant warning of danger. Hutton waved the binnacle lamp. and called for a rope and ladder for the pilot. The lookout called they'd never clear the point. "Then we'll go somewhere else," screamed the demented captain, and promptly ordered the helm towards the light. "Steer to port!" "That's a bad light, Captain, that's a bad light. There be peril. We'll be on the rocks, I tell you." "I told you, steer to port! Damn your eyes!" It was all too late when it struck him. All around, ghosts. Ghosts of seamen lost, and those about to be lost. The spirit then was bad. It snared them all with fear and confusion. The Irex floundered past the Needles, but the lee shore sucked them in. The mighty vessel grounded and stuck fast below the towering cliffs of Scratchel's Bay. The captain ordered all to abandon ship, and with Irvine went aft to cut away 2 boats. A huge wave crashed against the Irex stern, and the boats splintered together. A wreckage of rope and broken wood made a flowing carpet on which the 2 men were transported over the side into the yawning gulf. The gulf was the back surge of the waiting sea. Before its great claw grabbed and claimed its prize, 2 lives now, and more to be had soon. With captain and first mate gone, the crew were left to their own devices. Each man made for the nearest refuge. In the freezing blackness, to climb the shrieking rigging must have daunted even the keenest spirit, but nevertheless, it was better than being pulverized by the breaking waves. It was noted that Hansen, the boatswain, tried to rescue the ship's log, but lost his life in the deed. The log was also lost. Most of the crew managed to get to the main tops, halfway up the centre mast, but Seaman Dick Stern was trapped on deck between a winch and a spar. His leg and arm were broken, and each time a wave crashed across the deck, he was buffeted. His screams of agony eventually dwindled as he died. That dreadful night seemed never-ending. In the tops, the men had managed to secure a few blankets, some condensed milk, and a bottle of port wine. But in the mizzen, towards the stern, a terrified boy named Jones was striving to stay alive by wrapping himself in a rug and lashing it with rope around the mast. Way below on deck, a cabin boy, Oglive, who was later branded a stupid boy, paid the price for his reluctance to climb aloft. He had first gone into the rope locker, and then sheltered beneath some hatch covers, only to be swept away with them. Stupidity or bad luck? It was not until 9 a.m. that the wreck was spotted, and gone 10 when the Charles Luckham lifeboat was launched from Totland. The storm was too fierce for the rowers to make any headway, but the steam collier Hampshire, which was sheltering, bravely offered it a tow. However, although having cast off from the collier, as they rounded the Needles, lifeboat crew were unable to get any closer than 200 yards from the Irex. They were reluctantly forced to turn back. Minutes later, the Irex deckhouse was swept away, and in it, Harry Grayson. At last, the only chance left was to put into operation. The rescue rocket team from Freshwater arrived. From the cliff top, Coast Guard Hallett made a brilliant single shot into the teeth of the gale. The rocket carried a light line all the way to the Irex foremast, where it lodged in the rigging. The stricken crew now had to make a perilous mid-air crossing between the masts by means of the bracing wires. One man was lost in this exercise. From the cliff, the gathering onlookers saw Apprentice Hatchett fall to his death when his frozen fingers could no longer grip. After another 2 hours, the Irex men managed to haul and make fast a very long and heavy cable from the cliff top. This achievement was not without incident. Halfway through the operation, an extremely brave coastguard by the name of Mayo volunteered to climb down the line and free it from a rock on which it had been snagged. Over he slithered into swirling spray, which was flying over the cliff edge like a waterfall in reverse. His great heroism was rewarded by success. The first man to be rescued was Nichols at 3 p.m, and then successfully until 9:25 p.m, with the help of a series of troops from Golden Hill Fort. The 23rd man, who just happened to be one of two stowaways, was hauled to safety. By 12:30 a.m, all were ashore, except for poor Jones, who was still lashed to the mizzen. It was another night of frozen hell for the boy. The following morning he was still alive. The remaining onlookers saw a feeble wave, but his end must be soon. It was due to the great bravery of one of the Irex's ordinary crewmen that Jones was saved. The man was a Negro by the name of Isaac Rose. Together with another volunteer, Coast Guard Mackin, he risked his life by going back to the wreck. Having descended to the deck, Isaac Rose dodged the waves which still swept the ship from broadside. He scrambled up the mizzen, untied his young fellow crewmen, and bodily carried him back through the breaking waters and up to the main tops, where Mackin was waiting to assist with the rescue tackle. Shortly after this last survivor was brought ashore, the lines parted. Of the 36 men and boys aboard, 29 were directly saved, but one, a crewman called Stern, who had been trapped in the poop throughout the first night, sadly died from his injuries a few days later. The fitter of the survivors and NCOs of the Needles Battery were eventually presented to Her Majesty Queen Victoria. With the Irex master and log gone, an official inquiry could only find a scapegoat in the unlucky lifeboat Cox, who was relieved of his post a year later. A small amount of the Irex superstructure was salvaged, but most was left to the sea, in which it eventually broke up. Some of her remains, and that for cargo, are still lying in Scratchel's Bay. Now this was to be the end of my movie, but I received a sleeping buzz, a visit from some ethereal ghost that whispered in my mind. It triggered the following few minutes. To the crowds that she drew, such a splendid sight. Then her decks were all new, and her paint shone bright, the Irex. So eager her crew, with her sheets drawn tight. Her spars were all new, and her paint shone bright, the Irex. But cold winds blew, and day was night, though her ropes were new, and her paint shone bright, the Irex. Then raw fear grew, on courage a blight, yet her boats were new, and their paint shone bright, the Irex. To skipper's view came a pin-prick light, perhaps Saviour's new, and her paint shone bright, the Irex. 'Twas promise untrue, the storm's angry bite, make bearing anew, yet still her paint shone bright, the Irex. Too late came the clue, came anger and fright. Her shrouds were all new, and her paint shone bright, the Irex. Aground the ship slew, unseen was her plight, though her lamps were all new, and their paint shone bright, the Irex. Dark reaper now due, for skipper no flight, tall masts were all new, and her paint shone bright, the Irex. A rocket then flew from cliff stormy height, snagged rigging strung new, and her paint shone bright, the Irex. With stowaways too, survivors all right, from tops that were new, left paint that shone bright, the Irex. Then hero on cue rose rescued with might, determining new, dark muscles shone bright, the Irex. Boys' safety pursue, all danger to spite, admirers all knew, their wonder shone bright, the Irex. Now life's only sprue, the cast was finite, mould fragile and new, for future hope bright, the Irex. 'Twas farewell and adieu from back of the white, the coffins were new, their varnish shone bright, ex-Irex. Through watery hue, now seekers just might sense glimmers not new of paint that shone bright, the Irex. Then to heaven's gate they drew, St. Peter was polite. Asked bad spirit, what do you do? Its answer was forthright, the Irex.
I had my first mate on board this man of war.
Hey, Sam's gone away on board a man of war.
I wish I had my first mate on board this man of war.
Hey, Sam's gone away on board a man of war.
Pretty work, brave boys.
Pretty work, I sang. Sam's gone away on board a man of war.
Pretty work, brave boys.
Just to finish off, here's a little of my other stuff. My story, Joseph's Magic Albatross, is based on my grandfather who saved the bird. This first edition was published in 1993. The latest third edition is for the Kindle app from Amazon Books. Here's another story of mine, also for Kindle, and you can also see my range of World War II story files. You can find me on Facebook and see my short movies at John's Flicks YouTube. And thanks for watching.